Oh my goodness! They're both shaking like leaves. Michael gasped as he crouched down on the side of the road, staring at the two dogs pressed tightly against each other. It was early on a chilly spring morning in a small town in Ohio, and Michael had been on his way to the hardware store when he noticed the furry pair huddled under an abandoned wooden crate near a drainage ditch. Their coats were muddy, their bodies thin, and their eyes wide with fear. The sight stopped him in his tracks. For a moment he just stood there, his grocery bag dangling from his arm, unsure of what to do. But his heart told him he couldn't just leave them. Michael slowly placed the bag on the ground and crouched lower, making his voice as calm and soft as he could. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." One dog was slightly larger, a golden retriever mix with matted fur and a limp in his left leg. The other, smaller and with floppy ears, looked like a young beagle mix, trembling so hard it was almost rocking against the other. The way the bigger dog shifted, almost wrapping itself around the smaller one, struck Michael deeply. It was like watching siblings protecting each other in the face of danger. Michael extended his hand, palm up, letting them catch his scent. For a long while, neither dog moved. Cars hummed in the distance. A robin called from a nearby tree, and still the dogs stayed frozen. Then, tentatively, the smaller one sniffed the air, and the larger dog nudged it forward ever so slightly. The little beagle mix took one cautious step toward Michael, nose twitching. Michael barely breathed. "That's it. You're brave. You're safe now." When the puppy finally brushed its nose against his fingers, Michael felt a wave of relief and emotion wash over him. The bigger dog followed, pressing its nose gently against his hand. They were thin, fragile, and clearly exhausted, but there was trust starting to spark. Michael knew he couldn't just leave them. His truck was parked a few feet away, and he gently coaxed them closer, speaking in a low voice the whole time. It wasn't easy. The retriever mix winced every time he stepped on his injured paw, and the beagle kept glancing back at the crate as though afraid to abandon it. But eventually, with patience and encouragement, both dogs followed Michael to the truck. He lifted them carefully into the back seat, spreading out an old blanket he kept there. They curled up together immediately, their bodies still trembling, but calmer now that they were out of the cold. Michael closed the door softly, sat behind the wheel, and took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what he was going to do next, but he knew he was responsible for them now. His first stop was the local veterinary clinic. Dr. Sanders, a kind woman with silver hair pulled back into a bun, greeted him as he carried the smaller dog in his arms, while the retriever mix hobbled beside him. "Looks like you've brought me some new friends," she said warmly. Michael explained how he found them, and Dr. Sanders immediately ushered them inside. The exam room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the dogs shivered again as they were lifted onto the table. "They're both underweight," Dr. Sanders noted, gently pressing along the beagle's ribs. "The retriever has a sprain in that leg, maybe from running too far or being hit lightly. They're lucky you came along." Michael listened intently as the vet outlined what they needed: proper food, rest, medicine, and lots of love. He nodded, his chest tightening at the thought of leaving them alone again. "Can I foster them?" he asked, almost surprising himself. He hadn't planned for this. His modest home was quiet and simple, but in that moment, the idea of letting them go back to uncertainty felt unbearable. Dr. Sanders smiled. "I think that would be wonderful. Let's get them started on the road to recovery." By the time Michael drove home, the sun was higher in the sky. He parked by his small white house with the red shutters, carried the beagle inside, and guided the retriever carefully up the steps. His living room was cozy, with a worn sofa, a bookshelf full of old novels, and a rug that looked inviting even to dogs who had never known comfort. The moment he placed bowls of water down, both dogs lapped furiously, tails wagging faintly for the first time. Michael couldn't help but smile. "That's it. You're safe now." As the days turned into weeks, Michael found himself building a new routine around the two dogs. He named the bigger retriever Buddy and the smaller beagle Daisy. Every morning he'd wake up early, prepare their meals with care, and take them outside into his fenced yard. At first they were nervous, staying close to the door, but gradually they began exploring. Daisy would sniff every corner, ears flopping as she ran from one patch of grass to another, while Buddy limped more carefully, but always kept his eyes on her, as if guarding her every move. Michael often stood at the window with his coffee, watching them, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Neighbors began to notice, too. Mrs. Parker from next door leaned over the fence one afternoon and said, "I saw those pups with you. Where did they come from?" Michael explained briefly, and Mrs. Parker's face softened. "That's a good thing you did. They look happier already." Soon, word spread around the neighborhood about the two rescued dogs. Children would pause on their bikes to watch Daisy chase butterflies, and older folks smiled when they saw Buddy resting peacefully on the porch, his eyes half closed in the sun. One Saturday, Michael took them for a walk through the town park. The cherry blossom trees were in bloom, scattering pink petals along the pathways. Families strolled with ice cream cones, and children laughed on the swings. At first, Buddy and Daisy clung close to Michael's legs, nervous at the crowd. But as they walked further, Daisy's tail began to wag more confidently, and Buddy's ears perked up at the sound of children's giggles. People stopped to admire them, asking their names, petting them gently. "They're so sweet," one woman said. "You're giving them a second chance." Michael felt a lump in his throat, pride and joy mingling inside him. Evenings at home became Michael's favorite time. Daisy would curl up at his feet while Buddy rested his head on Michael's knee, sighing contentedly. Sometimes Michael read aloud to them, his voice filling the quiet house. Other times, he just sat there, one hand on each dog, feeling the steady rhythm of their breathing. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive with companionship and love. But the journey wasn't without challenges. Buddy's leg took time to heal, requiring gentle care and short walks. Daisy, though playful, sometimes woke at night whimpering, as if haunted by memories of fear. Michael would kneel by her side, stroking her ears, whispering reassurance until she calmed. Each setback only deepened his bond with them. He wasn't just caring for dogs, he was helping them rediscover trust, safety, and joy. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Michael sat on his porch with Buddy and Daisy beside him. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the town was quiet. He looked down at the two dogs, both now calmer, healthier, and happier, and thought about the first time he saw them trembling under that crate. "You've come so far," he murmured. The dogs lifted their heads, eyes shining with gratitude he could feel even without words, and for the first time in a long while, Michael felt truly complete. It was only the beginning, but already their story had begun to ripple through the community, inspiring kindness in others. People who had once passed by strays without a second thought now carried treats in their pockets, just in case. Families spoke of adopting pets from shelters rather than buying. The two trembling dogs had become more than just rescues. They were symbols of hope, of the difference one person's compassion could make. Michael had no idea what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. Life had changed forever. For him, for Buddy, for Daisy, and maybe even for the whole town. Michael woke up to the sound of soft whimpers and the shuffle of paws on the wooden floorboards. The morning light filtered in through the half-closed blinds of his modest bedroom, warming the cream-colored walls with golden streaks. At the foot of his bed, Daisy was stretching, her floppy ears bouncing as she yawned wide, while Buddy carefully rose to his feet, still favoring his healing leg. Michael rubbed his eyes and sat up, smiling at the sight of them. "You two are early birds," he said, his voice rough with sleep. The dogs wagged their tails in unison, and Michael couldn't help but chuckle. After throwing on a sweatshirt, he padded to the kitchen where the bowls were waiting. The clinking of kibble against ceramic was enough to send Daisy into a small frenzy, her paws tapping excitedly on the floor. Buddy waited patiently beside her, his tail swishing slowly. Michael bent down to stroke Buddy's head. "You're the calm one, huh?" he said softly, though he knew Buddy's quiet demeanor was partly born from weariness. As the dogs ate, Michael leaned against the counter with his coffee mug, watching them with a sense of purpose that still felt new but deeply grounding. Later that morning, Michael decided it was time to introduce Buddy and Daisy to something beyond the safety of his house and yard. The weather was perfect: crisp air, blue skies, and the faint scent of spring flowers carried by the breeze. He loaded them into the truck, spreading out the blanket on the back seat, and drove to the town's open fields just beyond the park. The fields stretched wide, dotted with patches of wildflowers, and crisscrossed by dirt paths that families often used for picnics and weekend strolls. At first, both dogs stuck close to him, their eyes darting nervously at every passing car or distant bark. Michael crouched low, offering comfort. "It's okay. This is freedom now." Slowly, Daisy ventured a few steps ahead, sniffing eagerly at the grass. Buddy followed, his limp making him slower, but his protective instinct keeping him near Daisy. Watching them venture into the open space made Michael's heart swell. For the first time, they weren't trembling. They were curious. A family with 2 small children passed by, and Daisy wagged her tail shyly when the little girl held out a hand. Buddy hesitated, but eventually allowed the boy to pat his back. Michael watched, astonished. Only a few weeks ago, both dogs would have cowered. Now, though still cautious, they were beginning to trust the world again. That afternoon, Michael brought them back home, where Daisy quickly fell asleep on the rug, curled into a tiny ball, while Buddy sprawled across the porch, soaking in the sun. Michael sat beside him, resting his hand on the retriever's back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. His neighbors strolled by, and one of them, a man named Greg who lived down the street, stopped to chat. "Those dogs look like they belong with you," Greg said, nodding approvingly. Michael laughed softly. "Feels like they adopted me instead." Over the following weeks, Buddy and Daisy continued to grow stronger. Daisy's playful side bloomed, and she turned every stick into a treasure, every patch of grass into an adventure. Buddy, though slower, showed a gentle strength that made everyone who met him fall in love. When Michael took them to the park, people would stop and ask about their story. Michael told it simply: 2 dogs found Trembling under a crate, now finding their way back to life. Each time he told it, the reactions were the same: wide eyes, kind smiles, words of admiration. The story seemed to spread through town, touching hearts in ways Michael hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Michael received a call from Dr. Sanders, the vet. She asked how the dogs were doing, and Michael described their progress. "That's wonderful," she said warmly. "They've come so far already. Would you be willing to bring them by next week? We're holding an adoption event at the clinic. People would love to meet them, and it might inspire others to adopt." Michael paused, glancing at Buddy and Daisy resting side by side on the porch. The thought of them leaving tugged at his heart, but he understood the importance of sharing their story. "Of course," he replied. "We'll be there." The following Saturday, Michael drove Buddy and Daisy to the clinic. The parking lot was bustling with families, children holding balloons, and volunteers guiding dogs of all shapes and sizes. Inside, there were rows of kennels and tables with information about adoption. Michael guided Buddy and Daisy through the crowd, their leashes in hand. At first, the dogs were overwhelmed by the noise and commotion, pressing close to Michael. He knelt down, rubbing their ears. "You're safe, just like always." Gradually, they relaxed, tails wagging as curious children approached. The moment Michael introduced them to the crowd, people were captivated. Parents leaned in as he told their story, while children stroked Daisy's soft ears and hugged Buddy's sturdy frame. The two dogs became the stars of the event, drawing a steady circle of attention. Dr. Sanders caught Michael's eye across the room and gave him a knowing smile. The story of Buddy and Daisy wasn't just about rescue. It was about resilience and hope, and everyone there could feel it. When the event ended, Michael drove home with Buddy and Daisy curled up in the back seat once again. The sky outside was glowing pink with sunset, and Michael felt a quiet satisfaction. He wasn't ready to let them go, and deep down he wondered if he ever would be. But he knew something important. Their journey had already touched lives beyond his own. The dogs stirred softly, pressing against each other as they slept, and Michael whispered, "You're changing the world, little by little." That night, Michael sat on the porch while Buddy and Daisy lay at his feet, the cool evening air carrying the scent of lilacs. Fireflies began to dance in the yard, and the sound of crickets filled the quiet spaces between breaths. For Michael, life had taken an unexpected turn, but one he wouldn't trade for anything. As Buddy sighed deeply and Daisy shifted closer, Michael realized this was only the beginning of their story. The days ahead promised new challenges, new joys, and new connections. He didn't know exactly what was coming, but he knew he wasn't facing it alone anymore. The morning after the adoption event, Michael awoke with a deep sense of peace. The air drifting in from the open window was cool and fresh, filled with the sound of chirping birds and the faint hum of a lawnmower down the street. Buddy and Daisy were curled up side by side on the rug near the bed, their breathing slow and steady, no longer the fearful gasps of dogs who lived in uncertainty. Michael lay there for a moment, just watching them, marveling at the simple miracle of how far they had come. He thought about how everyone at the event had gathered around to meet them, how people's eyes had softened when hearing their story, and how the children had giggled while petting Daisy's ears. It filled Michael with a pride he hadn't felt in years. Later that morning, after breakfast, Michael decided to bring them back to the open fields near the park where they had first tested their courage beyond the yard. This time, Daisy bounded out of the truck with enthusiasm, tugging gently at the leash, while Buddy followed slowly, but with a more confident stride than before. Michael let them explore the paths, his heart lifting as Daisy chased a butterfly across the grass, her floppy ears bouncing wildly, and Buddy paused to sniff a patch of wildflowers. his tail giving a slow, content wag. When a jogger passed by and offered a friendly wave, Buddy and Daisy didn't shrink back like before. They stood steady, tails moving, and Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He whispered to them, "You're braver than you know." The dog's progress became a kind of rhythm in Michael's life. Every day brought new, small victories. Buddy learning to put more weight on his healing leg, Daisy learning to sleep through the night without whimpering, both of them growing stronger with each meal and each walk. The neighborhood children grew especially fond of Daisy, who always responded to their laughter with her own wagging enthusiasm. One boy named Luke brought a tennis ball over one afternoon, and Daisy learned how to fetch, proudly trotting back to Michael each time with the ball clamped in her tiny jaws. Buddy would watch from the porch, his eyes bright and gentle, as if cheering her on in silence. One Saturday, Michael decided to take both dogs to the lake just outside of town. The water shimmered under the sun, and families had gathered with picnic baskets and fishing rods. Michael wasn't sure how the dogs would react, but he thought it was time to try something new. At first, Daisy barked playfully at the water's edge, dipping her paws in and hopping back when the waves lapped against her. Buddy, slower and more cautious, approached with careful steps. Michael waded in just enough to encourage them. Daisy soon splashed into the shallow water, tail wagging furiously, while Buddy eased himself down at the shoreline, dipping his nose into the cool water. People nearby watched and smiled, one woman even commenting, "Looks like they've found their happy place." Michael sat on the shore, his jeans rolled up and his shoes off, throwing sticks for Daisy while Buddy lay beside him, the water washing gently over his paws. In that moment, Michael felt a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he was missing. For years he had lived alone, his routines quiet and solitary. Now his days were full of new energy, new responsibility, and new joy. The dogs weren't just companions, they were family. As the weeks turned into months, Buddy and Daisy became familiar sights in town. They accompanied Michael to the hardware store, the bakery, and even the local farmer's market. People greeted them by name, and sometimes Michael overheard whispers of admiration. "That's the man who saved those two dogs." At the market one morning, a woman named Claire knelt down to pet Daisy and asked Michael about their journey. Michael shared the story, and Claire's eyes welled with tears. "You've given them more than a home," she said softly. "You've given them hope." That night, sitting on the porch under a sky full of stars, Michael thought about her words. He hadn't set out to become an example. He had simply followed his heart that day by the drainage ditch, yet the ripples of that choice were spreading wider than he ever imagined. His neighbors were visiting the shelter, families were discussing adopting instead of buying, and children were learning the value of kindness through Daisy and Buddy. The thought humbled him. Still, there were challenges. Buddy's legs sometimes stiffened after long walks, and Daisy had bursts of nervous energy that left her pacing in circles. Michael had to learn patience on the hard days, when progress felt slower or setbacks arose. But even on those days, when he sat with Buddy's head resting in his lap, or Daisy curled tightly against his side, he knew it was worth it. One evening, Michael was invited by Dr. Sanders to speak at a small community event about rescue and adoption. Nervous at first, Michael wasn't used to public speaking, but when he stood at the front of the community hall with Buddy and Daisy by his side, the words came easily. He told the story, from the beginning. The crate, the trembling, the slow steps toward trust. The room was silent except for his voice, and when he finished, the audience erupted into applause. Several families approached him afterward, eager to learn more about fostering or adopting. Michael realized then that this story wasn't just his to keep. It belonged to everyone who believed in compassion. Driving home that night with Buddy and Daisy asleep in the back seat, Michael glanced at them through the rearview mirror. They looked peaceful, their bodies pressed close just as they had been that first day. But now it was different. They were no longer trembling from fear. They were sleeping in comfort, safe and loved. Michael smiled softly and said, "We're doing something good, aren't we?" The dogs stirred slightly, tails twitching in their sleep, as if answering yes. The summer brought longer days and new adventures. Michael took Buddy and Daisy on hikes through the wooded trails near the state park. Daisy raced ahead, ears flying, while Buddy kept a steady pace beside Michael, his eyes scanning the trees as though keeping watch. At the peak of one trail, they sat together on a rocky ledge overlooking the valley, the sun casting golden light over the landscape. Michael placed an arm around Buddy and Daisy, whispering, "Look how far we've come." The bond between the three of them only deepened. When Michael read in the evenings, Daisy often curled into his lap while Buddy lay at his feet. When Michael worked in the yard, Buddy would rest nearby, and Daisy would dash after every leaf that blew across the grass. When Michael sat quietly by the fire at night, both dogs nestled close, their warmth seeping into him like a comfort he hadn't known he needed. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, full, and meaningful. The story that began with two trembling dogs under a crate had become something far greater than Michael ever envisioned. It was a story of healing, of trust rebuilt, and of hope shining brighter with each passing day. And though Michael knew there would be many more chapters ahead, he embraced each one with gratitude, because now he was no longer walking alone. The days of summer stretched on, and Michael found himself adjusting seamlessly to life with Buddy and Daisy. Each morning began with their eager faces peering up at him as he stirred from sleep, tails wagging like clockwork alarms. The once quiet house now pulsed with energy, paws clicking across the floorboards, toys scattered across the living room, and a warmth that seemed to fill every corner. Michael would smile as he brewed his coffee, watching Daisy chase her tail in the sunlight, while Buddy settled comfortably by the screen door, his eyes keeping a gentle watch on the yard outside. One weekend, Michael decided to plan a special outing. He had heard about a dog-friendly festival in a neighboring town, complete with agility courses, food stands, and pet adoption booths. It sounded like the perfect chance for Buddy and Daisy to experience something new. Loading them into the truck, Michael felt a twinge of nervousness. Crowds had once terrified the pair, but he reminded himself of how far they had come. He patted Buddy's head as he drove and said, "You'll be all right. You both will." When they arrived, the festival was already bustling. Music floated through the air, children laughed as they ran between booths, and dogs of all breeds trotted happily alongside their owners. At first, Buddy and Daisy pressed close to Michael's legs, their eyes darting nervously at the noise and movement. Michael crouched down, stroking their fur. "Just remember, I'm right here." Slowly, they began to loosen up. Daisy sniffed at the ground, her ears perked, while Buddy raised his head, watching the other dogs with cautious curiosity. They made their way through the rows of stands. Children knelt to greet Daisy, who licked their hands shyly, while Buddy allowed gentle pats from strangers. Michael signed them up for a simple agility course designed for beginners, curious to see how they would respond. Daisy took to it quickly, darting through tunnels and leaping over small hurdles, her energy drawing cheers from onlookers. Buddy, though slower and more hesitant, walked through the course with dignity, his tail giving a slow wag each time he finished an obstacle. Watching them, Michael felt an almost overwhelming pride. Just months ago, these two had been trembling under a crate. Now they were inspiring strangers with their resilience. After the course, Michael sat under a shade tree with the dogs at his side, sipping lemonade while they rested. A woman with a golden retriever approached and struck up a conversation. "I heard your dog's story from one of the volunteers," she said warmly. "It's amazing what you've done for them." Michael shook his head with a modest smile. "They've done more for me than I could ever do for them." The woman's eyes softened. "Sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us too." That night, when Michael returned home with Buddy and Daisy, he let them into the yard. They rolled in the grass, tails wagging furiously, before collapsing in a tired heap on the porch. Michael watched them with a full heart. He thought about the woman's words and realized how true they were. His life had changed completely since that morning by the drainage ditch. The emptiness he once carried had been replaced with companionship, laughter, and purpose. As summer turned to fall, the air grew cooler and the leaves began to blaze with color. Michael loved walking with Buddy and Daisy through the park, where the ground was covered in reds, oranges, and yellows. Daisy leapt into the piles of leaves with abandon, sending them scattering, while Buddy trotted steadily, his eyes calm and watchful. Families often stopped to greet them, some recognizing them from the adoption event or the festival. Children whispered excitedly, "That's Buddy and Daisy," as if meeting celebrities. Michael couldn't help but smile each time. In October, Michael received another invitation from Dr. Sanders. This time, she asked if he would be willing to bring Buddy and Daisy to a school assembly where she was speaking about kindness to animals. Michael agreed, though he wondered how the dogs would handle a noisy gymnasium full of children. When the day came, he walked into the school with Buddy and Daisy at his side. The gym buzzed with energy as children sat cross-legged on the floor. When Dr. Sanders introduced them and shared their story, the room grew quiet. Michael spoke a few words about what it meant to care for them, his voice steady but emotional. When the children were invited to come forward and meet the dogs, Daisy wagged furiously while Buddy leaned into the soft pats. The joy on the children's faces was unforgettable. Driving home afterward, Michael realized the story of Buddy and Daisy had become bigger than he ever imagined. It wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about inspiring compassion in others, about showing that even the most broken beginnings could turn into something beautiful. Buddy and Daisy were no longer trembling under a crate. They were standing tall in front of a community, changing hearts one by one. The first snowfall of the year arrived not long after. Michael let the dogs into the yard, watching as Daisy bounded through the snowdrifts, leaving trails behind her. Buddy walked carefully at first, then began to play too, tossing his nose into the snow and wagging his tail. Michael laughed out loud, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. The sight of them playing in the snow, free and joyful, was a memory he knew he'd treasure forever. That evening, sitting by the fire with Daisy curled on one side and Buddy on the other, Michael reflected on how far they had come in just half a year. From fear to trust, from trembling to joy, their transformation had been nothing short of remarkable. And as he stroked their fur, listening to the crackle of the fire and the quiet sighs of his companions, Michael knew one thing for certain. Their journey together was only just beginning. The winter deepened, and Michael discovered just how much joy Buddy and Daisy found in the cold months. Each morning when he opened the back door, Daisy would burst into the yard like a rocket, plowing through the snow with reckless delight. Her ears flopped wildly as she leapt into drifts taller than her legs. Buddy, though slower, found his own rhythm, moving with careful steps until he, too, began tossing snow into the air with his nose, his tail wagging as though he were years younger. Michael bundled himself in his heavy coat and boots, laughing as he followed them, sometimes throwing sticks into the powdery yard just to watch Daisy bound after them. Inside the house, Michael made adjustments to keep them comfortable. He laid out thick blankets near the fireplace where both dogs liked to curl up after their snowy adventures. The living room became their safe haven, filled with the sound of logs crackling, the warmth of the fire, and the sight of Buddy resting his head on Daisy's back. Michael often sat nearby with a book, pausing to look over at them, marveling at how peaceful they looked. It was hard to imagine them as the trembling pair he had first found. Their transformation reminded him each day of the power of patience and care. During one particularly heavy snowfall, Michael found himself snowed in for 2 days. Rather than feel isolated, he embraced the time with Buddy and Daisy. They spent hours together, Daisy pawing at the falling flakes from the window, Buddy dozing while the storm howled outside. Michael cooked hearty meals and even shared scraps of chicken with the dogs, laughing when Daisy licked the plate clean. Those quiet days cemented his bond with them even more. They weren't just pets now. They were his family, companions in every sense of the word. As the new year began, Michael received another invitation from Dr. Sanders. She asked if he and the dogs would visit the local retirement home, where many of the residents longed for the comfort of animals. Michael hesitated briefly, wondering how Buddy and Daisy would adapt to the unfamiliar environment, but he agreed. On the day of the visit, he dressed warmly and guided the dogs inside. The residents' faces lit up as soon as they saw them. Daisy wagged and trotted happily from one person to another, while Buddy leaned quietly against wheelchairs, offering his calm presence. One elderly man stroked Buddy's fur with trembling hands, whispering, "You remind me of my old dog." Tears filled his eyes, and Michael felt his own throat tighten. The visit was a success, and Michael promised to bring the dogs back again. Driving home afterward, he realized how much of an impact Buddy and Daisy were making on others. Their journey was no longer just about healing themselves. It was about spreading joy to people who needed it most. Michael couldn't have been prouder. Spring returned, and with it came fresh adventures. Michael planted flowers in the yard, while Daisy attempted to dig alongside him, her paws leaving little holes where tulips should have gone. Buddy lounged in the grass, keeping watch as always. When the cherry blossoms bloomed again in the park, Michael brought them to sit beneath the trees, petals raining down around them like confetti. Families stopped to greet them, sharing smiles and kind words. It was clear that Buddy and Daisy had become a part of the community's story, symbols of resilience and love. One weekend, Michael took them on a camping trip to the state forest. He pitched a tent by the lake, built a fire, and cooked dinner while the dogs explored the campsite. Daisy barked at crickets and chased fireflies, while Buddy stayed close, lying by Michael's chair as if guarding him. That night, under a blanket of stars, Michael lay in the tent with both dogs nestled beside him, their steady breathing blending with the sounds of the forest. He felt a peace he had never known before. As months passed, the seasons turned again. Buddy and Daisy grew healthier and stronger, their coats glossy, their eyes bright. Michael noticed how Daisy's boundless energy lifted his spirits on the hardest days, and how Buddy's quiet strength grounded him when life felt overwhelming. Together, they had filled his home with laughter, purpose, and love. They had also built bridges in the community, connecting people through their story. Families continued to adopt pets, inspired by their journey, and Michael often found himself answering questions from neighbors about fostering and care. One evening in late summer, Michael sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. Daisy was curled at his feet, panting from a day of play, while Buddy lay beside him, his head resting against Michael's leg. The sky blazed with oranges and purples, and the air hummed with the sounds of crickets. Michael thought back to that morning months ago when he had first spotted the two trembling dogs. He never could have imagined how much they would change his life. He whispered softly, "You saved me too." The dogs stirred, their tails thumping against the porch floor as if in agreement. Michael knew the story wasn't close to finished. New challenges and adventures lay ahead, but he felt ready for them. Buddy and Daisy were no longer just survivors. They were beacons of joy, living proof of what love and kindness could do. And as the evening settled into night, Michael felt an overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected journey they were sharing, one that was still unfolding with every passing day. The autumn that followed was rich with color, and Michael found himself savoring every walk with Buddy and Daisy as the leaves crunched beneath their paws. Daisy bounded through piles of orange and gold, scattering leaves like confetti, while Buddy trotted steadily by Michael's side, his limp now barely noticeable. The crisp air carried the scent of apples and wood smoke, and every outing felt like a celebration of how far they had all come together. Michael often stopped just to watch the two dogs playing, marveling at how the trembling creatures he had once carried into his home were now full of life and joy. The town had also come to know and love Buddy and Daisy. Families waved when they saw Michael walking them, and children often ran ahead to greet the pair. One afternoon, Michael brought them to the fall fair held at the town square. The fairgrounds were filled with the sounds of fiddles, laughter, and the scent of kettle corn. At first, Buddy and Daisy pressed close to Michael, wary of the crowd, but soon their curiosity took over. Daisy wagged furiously at every child who stopped to pet her, while Buddy, calm and steady, let strangers scratch behind his ears. People recognized them instantly, whispering their names, and Michael overheard someone say, "Those are the dogs who were rescued. Look at them now." Michael entered them in a small pet parade held at the fair. Daisy pranced alongside the other dogs, her tail wagging non-stop, while Buddy walked proudly at her side. The crowd cheered as they passed, and Michael felt an almost overwhelming wave of pride. He couldn't believe this was the same Buddy who once cowered at every sound, or Daisy who trembled in fear. Their transformation was a living story unfolding in front of everyone's eyes. Later, as the fair continued, Michael was approached by the town's mayor, a tall man with kind eyes. He shook Michael's hand firmly and said, "Your dog's story has touched this town more than you realize. You've inspired so many to open their homes and hearts. We're lucky to have you here." Michael felt humbled by the words, glancing down at Buddy and Daisy, who leaned gently against his legs. "I'm the lucky one," he replied simply. When winter returned, Michael worried how Buddy's leg would handle the cold. But to his surprise, Buddy took to the snow with a newfound energy, plowing through drifts with Daisy at his side. Michael built a snowman in the yard one day, only to laugh when Daisy barked at it and tried to tug the scarf off. Buddy stood back, watching with a slow wag of his tail as though amused by her antics. The house filled with warmth from the fireplace and the sound of the dogs sighing in their sleep felt like the coziest place in the world. That season, Michael was once again invited by Dr. Sanders to share Buddy and Daisy's story. This time, it was at the local library, where families gathered for a community event. Michael stood at the front of the room, the dogs by his side, and told their journey from the crate to the life they now lived. He spoke of patience, healing, and love, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Children listened intently, their eyes fixed on Daisy's floppy ears and Buddy's gentle gaze. At the end, the crowd applauded, and several parents approached to ask about adoption. It was clear their story was continuing to ripple outward, touching hearts again and again. The holidays that year were some of the happiest Michael had ever experienced. He decorated the house with twinkling lights, hung stockings for Buddy and Daisy, and even posed them for a photo in front of the tree. Daisy wore a small red bandana, and Buddy sported a plaid scarf, both looking proud as they sat beside Michael. He sent the photo to friends and neighbors, who smiled at the sight. On Christmas morning, Michael placed treats and new toys beneath the tree, laughing as Daisy tore through wrapping paper with excitement, while Buddy calmly chewed on a new bone. It was a holiday filled not with extravagance but with joy, companionship, and the warmth of family. As the year turned again, Michael reflected on all that had changed since the morning he first spotted two trembling dogs under a crate. He thought about the way Daisy now bounded freely into every new adventure, and how Buddy had become a steady guardian at his side. He thought about the neighbors, the children, and the families whose lives had been touched by their journey. And he realized something profound. Rescuing Buddy and Daisy had not only transformed their lives, but had also given him a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. That night, as snow fell gently outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Michael sat in his chair with Buddy on one side and Daisy on the other. He placed a hand on each of them and whispered, "Thank you." Their tails thumped softly in response, and Michael smiled, knowing their story still had many chapters left to be written. Spring arrived again, painting the town with blossoms and fresh green leaves. Michael loved this time of year, especially since Buddy and Daisy seemed to come alive with the season. Daisy bounded through the yard chasing butterflies, her ears flopping with every joyful leap, while Buddy stretched out in the sunlight, his eyes half closed in contentment. Michael often joined them on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the world reawaken after the cold months. He found himself reflecting on how different life felt now, how full, how bright, how hopeful. The town continued to embrace Buddy and Daisy as symbols of resilience. Michael was often stopped by neighbors who asked about the dogs, and children from down the block frequently came by to play fetch with Daisy. Buddy, steady as ever, allowed small hands to pat his back as he watched over the games with calm patience. Michael marveled at how their presence had brought so many people together. It wasn't unusual now to hear families talking about adopting animals, their inspiration clearly sparked by the story of the two trembling dogs who had found love and safety. One warm Saturday, Michael decided to take them to the farmer's market in town. The stalls were vibrant with fresh produce, flowers, and homemade goods, and the air was filled with music from a local band. Daisy pranced happily through the crowd, sniffing every basket of fruit she could reach, while Buddy walked with dignity at Michael's side. Children squealed with delight when they recognized the pair, and Michael patiently answered questions about how they were doing. At one stall, the vendor leaned down to offer Daisy a slice of apple, which she accepted with wagging enthusiasm, while Buddy received a gentle scratch behind the ears, Michael couldn't help but beam with pride as he watched them bring smiles to everyone they encountered. Later that afternoon, Michael sat beneath a large oak tree at the edge of the market, while Buddy and Daisy rested beside him. A young couple approached, holding hands and carrying a basket of vegetables. They knelt to pet the dogs and told Michael they had just adopted a rescue puppy after hearing his story at the library months earlier. "Your dogs inspired us," the woman said softly. "We realized we could give another animal a home too." Michael felt his chest tighten with emotion, humbled by the ripple effect Buddy and Daisy were creating. As summer settled in, Michael planned more adventures. He took the dogs to the river, where Daisy splashed happily in the shallow water, while Buddy waded carefully, his tail wagging as he cooled off. He brought them on picnics in the park, where children shared bits of sandwiches and families paused to listen as Michael retold their story. Each time he felt the same quiet awe at how two once frightened dogs had grown into ambassadors of hope. The highlight of the summer came when the town hosted its annual community picnic. This year, the mayor asked Michael if Buddy and Daisy could be part of the event, their story shared as a reminder of kindness and compassion. Michael agreed, and on the day of the picnic, the dogs walked proudly by his side into the park. Families gathered around as Michael spoke briefly about their journey, his words simple but heartfelt. Daisy wagged furiously as children petted her, while Buddy leaned calmly against Michael's leg. The applause that followed wasn't just for Michael, but for the dogs themselves, living proof of resilience and love. As evening fell, fireworks lit up the sky, and Michael worried how the dogs would react to the noise. He sat with them on the porch, speaking softly as the bursts echoed across the town. Daisy pressed close to his side, trembling at first, while Buddy rested his head on Michael's knee. Gradually, they calmed, reassured by his presence. Michael stroked their fur and whispered, "You're safe. Always." Watching the colors dance across the night sky, he felt a profound sense of peace. The seasons turned once again, and with autumn came new adventures. Michael took them apple-picking at a local orchard, where Daisy chased fallen apples and Buddy walked steadily among the rows of trees. Families greeted them warmly, many stopping to share stories of their own adopted pets. Michael realized more than ever how Buddy and Daisy had become part of something bigger, a movement of compassion spreading through the town. One crisp evening, sitting by the fire with both dogs curled against him, Michael reflected on all that had happened since that first day by the crate. They had not only healed, but had become healers themselves, touching lives in ways he never could have imagined. As Buddy sighed deeply and Daisy shifted closer, Michael whispered, "We're changing the world together, one step at a time." Their tails thumped softly in response, and Michael smiled, knowing their journey was still unfolding with countless more moments of love and joy ahead. The following spring marked a year since Michael had found Buddy and Daisy trembling under the crate, and he could hardly believe how much had changed. The once quiet home that had felt lonely and still was now alive with the sound of paws scampering across the floor, tails thumping against furniture, and soft sighs of contentment as the dogs rested after long days. Michael woke each morning to their eager faces and wagging tails, grateful for the joy they brought into every corner of his life. One warm April morning, Michael decided to take Buddy and Daisy on a hike to a trail they had never explored before. The forest was alive with birdsong, and sunlight filtered through the fresh green leaves. Daisy darted from tree to tree, her nose twitching with curiosity, while Buddy kept a steady pace beside Michael, his eyes calm and watchful as always. They reached a clearing with a small waterfall cascading into a pool, and Michael sat on a rock, watching Daisy splash in the shallow water while Buddy lay quietly at his feet. "Look at us," Michael murmured with a smile. From a crate on the roadside to a waterfall in the woods. Who would have thought? Their lives had become a series of moments like this, small and beautiful in their simplicity. Michael noticed how Buddy had grown more confident, no longer flinching at sudden noises, and how Daisy had blossomed into a bundle of playful energy that drew laughter from everyone she met. The sight of them playing in the water that day felt like a victory, a symbol of how far they had come together. Later in the season, Michael brought them to a charity walk for animals held in town. The event drew families, volunteers, and local organizations, all gathering to support rescue efforts. Michael walked proudly with Buddy and Daisy at his side, sharing their story with anyone who asked. Their presence seemed to inspire others, and by the end of the day, several families had signed up to adopt or foster. Dr. Sanders approached Michael with a warm smile and said, "Your dogs have become our best ambassadors." Michael looked down at Buddy and Daisy, who wagged their tails happily, and replied, "They've done all the work. I just gave them a chance." The summer that followed was filled with simple joys. Michael took them swimming at the lake, where Daisy leapt fearlessly from the shore into the cool water, while Buddy waded slowly but steadily, his tail wagging with each step. He brought them to picnics, where they lounged in the shade while children offered bits of sandwiches. He spent evenings on the porch with them at his feet, watching fireflies dance in the yard. Each moment felt like a reminder of the gift he had been given that day he chose to stop by the crate. One afternoon, Michael was approached by a local teacher who asked if he would bring Buddy and Daisy to her classroom for a special lesson on kindness. Michael agreed, and a week later he stood in front of a group of wide-eyed children telling the story of how he had found the two trembling dogs. Daisy wagged furiously as the children petted her, while Buddy leaned calmly against their sides, his gentle presence filling the room with quiet comfort. The children asked questions, eager to know how they could help animals too, and Michael left that day with a renewed sense of purpose. Buddy and Daisy were not just companions, they were teachers, showing children the value of compassion. As the year turned toward autumn, Michael reflected on the countless lives Buddy and Daisy had touched. Neighbors had adopted pets, families had opened their homes, and children had learned empathy through their story. The dogs had become beloved figures in the community, their journey inspiring hope in ways Michael never could have imagined. Sitting by the fire one crisp evening, with Buddy resting his head on Michael's knee and Daisy curled up against his side, Michael whispered, "You've changed everything." Their tails thumped in reply, and Michael smiled, knowing the journey was still far from over. The seasons continued to turn, each one bringing new adventures and deeper bonds. From snowy mornings to warm summer nights, from quiet evenings at home to bustling community events, Buddy and Daisy remained by Michael's side, their presence a constant source of love and strength. And though Michael often thought back to that first morning when he found them trembling, he knew those days were far behind. What lay ahead was a story still unfolding, full of joy, growth, and the unshakable bond between a man and his two dogs. The following winter brought with it crisp mornings and frosty nights, and Michael found himself marveling again at how Buddy and Daisy adapted to every season with their own kind of joy. Each morning when he opened the back door, Daisy darted out into the snow like a streak of brown and white, leaping into drifts as though they were her personal playground. Buddy followed more carefully, his breath puffing in the cold air, before tossing his nose into the powder with a low wag of his tail. Michael laughed every time, bundling himself in his thick coat, boots crunching across the icy yard as he watched them. Their energy and resilience gave him warmth that the fire inside never could. Inside, Michael made sure they were comfortable with soft blankets near the fireplace and bowls of warm water. The house became their retreat against the cold, filled with the crackle of wood burning and the dog's steady sighs as they curled up beside him. Sometimes Michael would sit for hours with a book, Buddy stretched across his feet, and Daisy nestled at his side. The storm raging outside, but peace filling the living room. He often thought about how far they had come. From fear and trembling to peace and trust, their journey still amazed him. During one particularly snowy afternoon, Michael was invited by Dr. Sanders to bring Buddy and Daisy to a community holiday event held at the town hall. The hall was decorated with lights and wreaths, and families gathered with cookies and hot cocoa in hand. Michael entered with Buddy and Daisy on their leashes, and the crowd lit up with recognition. Children ran to greet Daisy, who wagged so hard she nearly toppled over, while Buddy leaned gently against the legs of older guests, offering his calm comfort. Michael shared their story again, and once more he felt humbled by how people responded. Soft smiles, shining eyes, and words of gratitude. The mayor approached him after the event, shaking his hand and thanking him for reminding the community of the power of kindness. Michael glanced at the dogs leaning against his legs and thought, "They reminded me first." When spring finally broke through the winter chill, Michael decided it was time for another adventure. He packed the truck with a cooler, a blanket, and their favorite toys, and drove them out to a wide meadow he had discovered years ago. The grass was fresh and green, wildflowers blooming in every direction. Daisy tore across the field, chasing butterflies and rolling in the tall grass, while Buddy moved more slowly, stopping to sniff the flowers with a low wag. Michael lay back on the blanket, the sun warming his face as he watched them. In that wide-open field, surrounded by beauty and peace, he felt profoundly grateful for the moment. As the days lengthened into summer, Michael found himself invited to more community events. A local shelter asked if Buddy and Daisy could attend their open house, believing their story would encourage adoptions. Michael agreed, and on the day of the event, he once again walked proudly with them through the doors. Families gathered around, eager to hear how the two trembling dogs had become symbols of hope. Daisy wagged furiously, her joy spilling into every corner, while Buddy leaned calmly against Michael's leg, embodying steady strength. By the end of the event, several families had filled out adoption forms, inspired by what they had seen. Michael drove home with tears in his eyes, whispering to the dogs in the back seat, "You're changing lives." The summer brought new joys close to home as well. Michael began to notice how Buddy had grown more playful, chasing Daisy across the yard with a spark of energy that hadn't been there before. He also noticed how Daisy would curl up against Buddy at night, her trust in him absolute. Their bond was unbreakable, and Michael often sat quietly watching them, his heart swelling with love. They weren't just companions anymore. They were family, intertwined in a way that felt deeper than words. One late summer evening, Michael sat on the porch with Buddy and Daisy as the sun set behind the hills. The sky glowed in shades of orange and pink, the air warm and full of the sounds of crickets. Daisy lay at his feet, panting softly after a long day of play, while Buddy rested his head on Michael's knee, his eyes half closed in peace. Michael stroked their fur and whispered, "You've given me more than I could ever give you." Their tails thumped softly, and Michael smiled, knowing they understood. The year moved forward, bringing with it new seasons and new memories. Michael found himself reflecting often on how one simple choice, to stop and help two trembling dogs, had blossomed into something far greater than he could have imagined. Their story had touched countless lives, and their presence had filled his own with joy and purpose. And as he sat with them under the stars, listening to the steady rhythm of their breathing, Michael knew the journey was far from over. There were still so many moments ahead, so many memories waiting to be made, and he welcomed them with an open heart. The autumn air carried a crispness that made every walk with Buddy and Daisy feel like a celebration of change. The trees burned with reds and oranges, and the leaves crunched beneath their paws as they trotted along the winding paths of the park. Daisy darted joyfully into piles of leaves, sending them scattering with playful barks, while Buddy walked steadily by Michael's side, his tail giving a slow and content wag. Michael smiled as he watched them, marveling at how every season seemed to bring out a new side of their personalities. They had once trembled in fear, but now they greeted each day with joy. That fall, Michael received another invitation, this time from the local community center, where a program for children was being held to teach kindness and empathy. He agreed to bring Buddy and Daisy, knowing how much their story could mean to the young audience. On the day of the event, the gymnasium was filled with rows of children sitting cross-legged, their eyes lighting up as Buddy and Daisy walked in. Daisy wagged furiously, immediately lowering herself for the children to pet her, while Buddy leaned calmly against the nearest row, letting small hands stroke his fur. Michael told their story, his words simple and heartfelt, explaining how he had found them trembling under a crate and how they had grown into the confident, joyful dogs they were now. The children listened intently, some whispering to one another with wide eyes, and when Michael finished, the room erupted into applause. After the event, a teacher approached Michael with tears in her eyes. "You've given these kids more than a story," she said softly. "You've given them a lesson in compassion that will stay with them." Michael glanced down at Buddy and Daisy, who wagged happily, and replied, "They've been teaching me from the very beginning." Driving home that afternoon, he reflected on how far-reaching their journey had become. It wasn't just about his life or the dogs' lives anymore. It was about every person they inspired along the way. As winter approached, Michael found joy in the quiet evenings at home. The first snowfall came in December, and Daisy bounded into the drifts with unstoppable energy, her ears flopping as she leapt through the powder. Buddy followed more slowly, but soon found his own joy in pushing his nose into the snow, wagging as flakes stuck to his fur. Michael laughed as he watched them, his breath puffing out in the cold air, before calling them back inside to the warmth of the fire. He spread blankets near the hearth, and the dogs curled up close together, sighing deeply as they drifted into sleep. The house glowed with warmth and love, and Michael felt more content than he ever had before. The holiday season that year was filled with small but meaningful moments. Michael decorated the house with simple lights, hung stockings for Buddy and Daisy, and even invited neighbors over for cocoa by the fire. Daisy greeted everyone with enthusiastic wags, while Buddy leaned into their legs with his calm strength. One evening, Michael sat by the fire with the dogs at his side, listening to the laughter of his neighbors, and thought about how much his life had changed since that day by the crate. His home was no longer quiet and lonely. It was full of life, joy, and connection. In January, Michael was asked once again to bring Buddy and Daisy to a local event, this time at the library, where families gathered for story hour. He stood at the front of the room, the dogs sitting calmly beside him, and retold their journey. As always, the crowd listened intently, their faces softening with every word. Children hugged Daisy, who wagged and licked their faces, while Buddy leaned quietly against parents and grandparents, offering his silent comfort. Michael left the library that day with a heart full of gratitude, knowing their story continued to inspire compassion. The new year brought with it new adventures as well. Michael took Buddy and Daisy on weekend trips to nearby trails, watching Daisy dash ahead with boundless energy and Buddy following at a steady pace. He brought them to the farmer's market, where vendors offered treats and children rushed to greet them. Everywhere they went, people recognized them, whispering their names and smiling as they passed. Michael realized that Buddy and Daisy had become more than just pets. They were part of the fabric of the town, beloved by everyone who had heard their story. One evening in early spring, Michael sat on the porch with Buddy and Daisy at his side, watching the sun set in shades of pink and orange. Daisy lay across his feet, panting softly after a day of play, while Buddy rested his head on Michael's knee, his eyes calm and steady. Michael stroked their fur and whispered, "You've given me more than I ever thought possible." Their tails thumped softly in reply, and Michael smiled, knowing that their journey was still unfolding, filled with countless more moments of love and joy to come. The spring rains came in steady rhythms, turning the fields and yards into seas of green. Michael welcomed the change, finding peace in the sound of raindrops against the roof as he sat with Buddy and Daisy inside, the dogs sprawled out on the rug with toys between their paws. Daisy loved to press her nose against the window, watching the streams of water run down the glass, her tail thumping with every distant rumble of thunder. Buddy was more content to curl against Michael's legs, his calm presence grounding them all during the stormy days. When the sun returned, Michael made the most of it. He began taking Buddy and Daisy to the open meadows outside of town, where the grass grew tall and the air was alive with the songs of birds. Daisy bounded through the fields with uncontainable joy, ears flopping as she chased every butterfly she could find. Buddy followed more steadily, his gaze sweeping the horizon as though keeping watch, his tail swaying with quiet contentment. Michael often sat in the middle of the meadow, simply watching them, a smile on his face and gratitude filling his chest. He marveled at how far they had come, once trembling under a crate, now running free under the wide open sky. Their bond with the community deepened too. At the start of summer, Michael was invited by the local high school to bring Buddy and Daisy to a student assembly about kindness and responsibility. He agreed, and on the day of the event, the gym buzzed with students chatting and laughing until the moment Buddy and Daisy walked in. The room grew quiet, and Michael stood at the microphone, telling their story once more. He spoke about fear, healing, and trust, his voice steady and clear. The students listened, their expressions softening, and when Daisy wagged her tail wildly at the applause, laughter and cheers erupted. Afterward, students crowded around to pet the dogs, and several shared that they had decided to volunteer at the shelter. Driving home, Michael felt an overwhelming pride in Buddy and Daisy, not just for their resilience, but for the inspiration they carried wherever they went. That summer was filled with simple joys close to home. Michael planted a small garden in the yard, and Daisy took great interest in it, often darting between the rows of vegetables with dirt on her nose. Buddy was content to lie nearby, watching quietly as Michael worked. On warm evenings, Michael sat on the porch with the dogs at his feet, watching fireflies glow against the twilight. The house was filled with life in a way Michael had never thought possible. Every day felt like a blessing. and every moment was stitched together with laughter, love, and the sound of paws. One weekend, Michael took them on a trip to the mountains. They hiked trails that wound through tall pines and opened to breathtaking views of valleys below. Daisy raced ahead, her excitement echoing in playful barks, while Buddy moved steadily beside Michael, his eyes bright with calm strength. At the top of one trail, Michael sat on a rock with both dogs pressed close, looking out at the endless horizon. "We've come so far together," he whispered. The dogs wagged, leaning into him as though they understood. When autumn returned, Michael noticed the dogs had become not only symbols of resilience for the community, but also companions who had reshaped his entire life. His neighbors had grown closer through their story. Children spoke often about adopting animals, and families made new choices with compassion in mind. Everywhere he went, people greeted Buddy and Daisy with warmth, and Michael realized they had become a source of unity and inspiration. The first frost came early that year, coating the yard in sparkling white. Michael let the dogs outside, laughing as Daisy bounded into the frosted grass with wild joy. Buddy followed, moving carefully at first, then pressing his nose into the glittering ground with a wag. The world seemed brighter with them in it, every season richer and more meaningful. That evening, by the fire, Daisy stretched across Michael's lap while Buddy pressed against his side. Their steady warmth, a reminder of how far they had come and how deeply they belonged together. Michael often thought back to that morning he first saw them trembling under the crate, the fear in their eyes, and the uncertainty of what would happen next. Now, with Daisy sprawled on the rug and Buddy's calm gaze fixed on him, it felt almost impossible to imagine that beginning. Their journey had transformed not only their lives, but his own and the lives of so many others. And though Michael knew their story still had chapters left to unfold, he cherished each moment as it came, grateful for every paw print they left beside him. The winter that followed marked nearly 2 years since Michael had first found Buddy and Daisy huddled together beneath that crate, and as he looked around his warm, lively home, he could hardly believe how much had changed. The house that once felt silent now pulsed with life. Daisy's playful barks, Buddy's steady footsteps, the thump of wagging tails, and the comforting sighs of contentment as they curled up at night. Michael often caught himself reflecting on that morning when he chose to stop, how such a simple decision had blossomed into something that had transformed not only their lives, but also his own. One snowy morning, Michael decided to take Buddy and Daisy into town for the annual holiday parade. The streets were lined with families sipping cocoa, children bundled in scarves, and floats decorated with twinkling lights. When Michael walked down the street with Buddy and Daisy at his side, the crowd erupted into smiles and waves. Children called their names, and people whispered their story once again. Daisy pranced happily, her ears bouncing, while Buddy walked proudly, his gaze steady. The mayor spotted Michael in the crowd and approached to shake his hand, thanking him once more for reminding the town of the strength of kindness. Michael glanced down at the 2 dogs leaning close to him and felt humbled. He whispered quietly to them, "You've made more of a difference than I ever could." That evening, Michael sat by the fire, watching Daisy tear into a new toy and Buddy gnaw gently on a bone. The tree glowed softly in the corner. Stockings hung with care above the mantel. Neighbors dropped by with cookies. Children knelt to hug Daisy, and Buddy offered his calm comfort to everyone who entered. The house was alive with laughter, and Michael realized he no longer felt alone. His home was full, not just with the presence of Buddy and Daisy, but with the warmth of community that had grown around them. As the new year dawned, Michael began to notice how deeply Buddy and Daisy had reshaped the town. More families had adopted animals, inspired by their story. Children spoke easily about compassion and responsibility. The local shelter had seen record adoptions, and volunteers mentioned often how Buddy and Daisy's journey had encouraged them to give more of their time. It amazed Michael to realize how two frightened dogs had sparked so much change. In the spring, Michael planned a gathering at the park to celebrate Buddy and Daisy. Families came with their pets, the field filled with laughter and wagging tails. Michael stood at the center, Buddy and Daisy by his side, and shared a few words. "I found them when they were trembling, unsure if the world could be kind. But together we learned that love can transform everything, and the kindness you've all shown proves that their story belongs to all of us." The crowd applauded, children ran to pet Daisy, and Buddy leaned into Michael's leg with his quiet strength. It was a moment that captured everything they had built together. Seasons turned again, each bringing new memories. Daisy chased butterflies in the summer fields, her joy uncontainable, while Buddy lay in the grass watching her with calm eyes. In autumn, families greeted them at the fair, whispering their names like beloved friends. In winter, they curled by the fire, the glow of the flames flickering in their eyes. Every season, every moment, reinforced the bond they shared and the love that radiated from their story. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Michael sat on the porch with Buddy and Daisy at his feet. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, the air alive with the sound of crickets. Daisy curled against his leg, her breathing slow and steady, while Buddy rested his head on Michael's knee, his gaze full of quiet devotion. Michael stroked their fur and whispered, "You've given me a life fuller than I ever dreamed." Their tails thumped softly in reply, and Michael smiled, feeling tears sting his eyes. He thought of the journey, the trembling crate, the first hesitant steps of trust, the countless moments of growth, the laughter, the community, the lessons learned. He thought of how they had once been afraid of the world, and how now they had taught the world to be kinder. And in that moment, as the evening settled around them, Michael understood that their story had come full circle. From fear to love, from despair to joy, from isolation to community, they had walked it all together. The stars began to twinkle overhead, and Michael leaned back in his chair, Daisy and Buddy pressed close at his side. He no longer wondered what might have happened if he had walked past that crate. He knew he had chosen the path that filled his life with meaning, with purpose, with unconditional love. And as the night deepened, he whispered softly, "We made it. Together." Buddy and Daisy stirred, their tails wagging gently in the quiet night. And Michael closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that their journey, though full of challenges, had become a story of hope, belonging, and love that would live on in every heart it touched.